All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we are going on a journey, tracing some of the most powerful ideas ever conceived, ideas that literally tore down the old world and built the one we live in now. And we're going to tackle a huge question. Where does power actually come from? So, here's our game plan. We're going to start in a world ruled by absolute authority, then watch the explosive birth of individual rights, and finally, see how this centuries old conversation is asking questions we are still trying to answer today. Okay, first things first. To really get a handle on this revolution, you have to understand the world it replaced. And that was a world absolutely terrified of one thing: chaos. People were desperate for order, and they were willing to pay almost any price to get it. So picture this. 17th century thinker Thomas Hobbes looks around and sees a pretty grim picture. He basically says, look, without an absolute ruler, a single supreme power to keep everyone in line, life is just pure brutal anarchy, a war of every man against every man. And this gets to the heart of the problem Hobbes was trying to solve. To get out of this terrifying state of nature, he thought people had to make a really stark trade. You had to surrender your personal freedom to an all-powerful sovereign. In return, you get to survive. That's the deal. But what if power didn't have to be surrendered at all? What if it actually came from somewhere completely different? This brings us to the Enlightenment and its radical new answer, an idea that would go on to spark revolutions all across the globe. And here it is. This is the seismic shift. Suddenly, the whole idea of power gets turned completely upside down. The notion that legitimate rule flows up from the people, not down from a king or queen. Well, that was a fundamental challenge to, the entire structure of society. This whole revolution in thinking really starts with the individual. You have philosophers like René Descartes who put human consciousness, the power of your own reason, right at the center of existence. Suddenly, it's not about your place in some divine hierarchy, it's about your own ability to think. John Locke takes this new focus on the individual and gives it some serious political teeth. He argues that every single person is born with rights: life, liberty, and property. And these aren't gifts from a monarch, they are fundamental to who you are. No government has the authority to just take them away. So, if people are born with rights, then the whole point of having a government changes completely. It's not an institution for control anymore, it's an institution designed for protection. You see how this just flips the old idea on its head? We form societies by choice. We voluntarily enter into a contract, not to lose our freedom, but to better secure it, to protect our lives, our liberty, and our property. Jean-Jacques Rousseau takes this concept even further. He imagines a society guided by what he calls the general will, where the entire community, acting as one, decides its own laws and its own destiny, all aimed at the common good. And this revolutionary focus on individual liberty, well, it didn't just stop at politics. It completely reshaped economics. You get Adam Smith arguing that a nation's wealth grows best when people are free to chase their own economic interests. This is basically the groundwork for modern capitalism. But was this shiny new world of reason and rights the final answer? I mean, the ink was barely dry on these ideas before some powerful new critiques started popping up, questioning the very foundations of this entire revolution. The Enlightenment promised total liberation, right? Freedom from the chains of the old world. But later thinkers started asking a really tough question. What if this new freedom just created different kinds of chains? What if you're just trading one prison for another? Karl Marx looked at the world Adam Smith was describing and saw a huge problem. He said, in a capitalist system, everything becomes a commodity, just another thing to be bought and sold. And, he argued, that eventually includes human labor itself, which creates a new kind of economic slavery and massive inequality. And for Marx, this system actually created its own worst enemy, the proletariat, the working class. He argued their interests were in direct opposition to the ruling class, which set the stage for an inevitable clash, for revolution. Then you have Friedrich Nietzsche, who comes in with a totally different, even more radical attack. He wasn't worried about the economics, he was worried about the values. He was afraid that this focus on equality, rights, and comfort would lead not to human greatness, but to a safe, boring, and ultimately meaningless mediocrity, what he called the happiness of the herd. See, for Nietzsche, the real driver of human progress wasn't the search for happiness, but something he called the will to power. This isn't about dominating others. It's a primal drive for excellence, for overcoming challenges, for becoming more than you are. And he thought that drive was being put in danger by the very comfort the Enlightenment wanted to create. So, after all that, where does this whirlwind of ideas leave us? Well, the thing is, this debate isn't some dusty old piece of history. It is the same fundamental conversation we are still having right now, in our politics, in our culture, everywhere. Thinkers like John Stuart Mill tried to find a middle ground. He famously argued for as much individual freedom as possible, as long as it doesn't harm anyone else. But these core tensions, they're still here. Security versus liberty, the individual versus the group, equality versus excellence. These conflicts are still at the very heart of our modern world. And honestly, these questions are more urgent than ever. The philosophers we talked about were debating the power of kings and parliaments. We're now asking the exact same questions about social media companies, AI developers, and giant global corporations. The great conversation goes on, and it's forcing all of us to constantly ask, what do freedom, power, and society even mean anymore?